Today, in this episode of the Rebuilt Timeline series, I would like to talk about some Zelda comic books. And no, I'm not referring to the mangas by Akira Himekawa. We'll cover those books in a much later episode. Instead, I want to talk about the Valiant Zelda comic books, which were released for a brief time in the early 90s. I should have talked about these books earlier in the Rebuilt Timeline series, but I accidentally wrote down their release year as 1999 in my notes, when the year was actually 1990. But here we are now, so let's not waste any more time and get right into the video. The first thing I need to state before analyzing the comics is that due to not owning any of these books myself, I had to search online to find scanned versions of the books. I eventually did find a website with the books, but I don't believe it had every single story in it, so I might have not been able to read every comic in this Valiant series, but I have read about, I'd say 90% of all the comics. Since each issue contained around 4 stories, I will divide each section of this video into different parts for each story. I will give a brief summary of what happened in each story, and in the end, we'll decide whether these comics can be considered canon or not. Before getting into the main stories of the comics, we are actually given a short backstory, which seems to explain the events of Zelda 1986 and the adventure of Link. The prologue explains that legends were passed down about the Triforce, which contains the essences of power, wisdom, and courage. One day, Ganon and his demonic army attacked Hyrule and stole the Triforce of Power. Princess Zelda knew that if Ganon had possession of both the Triforce of Power and Wisdom, he would rule the land forever. So she was able to save the Triforce of Wisdom before Ganon could steal it. The prologue also explains that the Triforce of Courage remained hidden and could only be found by a mighty hero, so Zelda ends up sending her nursemaid Impa to find this hero. After a bit of traveling, Impa finds Link, a traveler who came to Hyrule in search of excitement, fame, and romance. This boy would later find all 3 of those things and possess the Triforce of Courage in his heart. For our first story, we learn that Princess Zelda decided to take the Triforce of Wisdom and leave Hyrule forever in order to prevent Ganon from ever taking over the kingdom. During her desperate escape though, Ganon's minions chase her into Midoro Swamp, so Link decides to go save her. Once Link finds Zelda and defeats the enemies, the two travel to the palace on the sea in order to obtain the flute, which Zelda will then use to transport herself far away from the kingdom. After entering the palace and passing the trial given, Link obtains the flute and gives it to Zelda. However, she realizes that being with Link is safer than running away from Hyrule, so she ends up wanting to go back to the northern palace instead. In this story, Ganon convinces the people of Saria Town that Link and Zelda are the evil ones and uses his manipulative ways to get the townsfolk on his side. Soon after, Link and Zelda arrive in the town to help the people, only to figure out what Ganon's latest scheme was. After battling it out in the town, Ganon ends up being beaten by the hero and the princess, and his lies are put to rest. This story features yet again another scheme of Ganon's, but this time he has a plan to trick Link. You see, the Triforce of Wisdom told Impa that if Link left the North Palace, it would be destroyed by Ganon. The hero would be killed, and Zelda's people would be enslaved. To prevent this from happening, Link promises to not leave the palace while Zelda and Impa visit the northern towns of Hyrule. While Link is hanging around the palace, the fairy sprite Myth uses a fountain to show Link that Impa and Zelda were captured by Ganon's army. Keeping his promise to not leave, Link sends the guards to rescue them. But this mission didn't end up a success. Ganon had the town of Rauru burned to the ground, and the only person to return to the palace was the injured commander of the guard. He was the one who told Link about the events that occurred, and ordered Link to go and help out Hyrule's people. Wanting to fulfill his promise though, Link decided to continue staying inside the palace. Soon after, Impa was found at the front gates of the northern palace. She told Link that Ganon had cursed Zelda into an eternal sleep once again, and that Link must go and break the curse before it's too late. This is when Link realizes that something fishy is going on. Impa was the one who told Link to stay in the palace for the day, but now she was going against what she said. Link realized that every encounter that occurred after Impa and Zelda originally left were all Ganon in disguise, trying to get Link to leave the palace, but clearly his plan didn't work in the end. Though this story is very short, Impa gives Link a history lesson that could be really important if these comics are considered canon. She explains that many brave warriors fought the forces of evil within Hyrule, but when they failed to level up, as she states, their quests were doomed. In this story, a familiar character visits the North Palace to see Link. This person is Bagu, a mistranslation from what his name was supposed to be in The Adventure of Link, Bug. However, he wasn't there just to visit with Link though. A while back, Ganon stole Bug's pet frogs and promised that he would give them back if Bug stole the Triforce of Wisdom. Link finds out about this later on, and after going through some trust issues, Bug ends up getting his frogs back, and Ganon thankfully doesn't get his hands on the Triforce for too long. In this story, Ganon stole the goddess statue from Ruto Town, and Link and Zelda storm Death Mountain to get it back. There isn't too much that goes on besides battles between Ganon and his minions, but eventually Link finds the Triforce of Power and takes it with him, as well as the goddess statue. When he touched the Triforce of Power, Link gained that element of the Triforce, and vowed that he would destroy Ganon with the new power he gained. Continuing from the last story, Link battles against Ganon at Parappa Palace, and forces him to retreat. As time goes on, Link becomes even more powerful by the minute, and later begins transforming into the next Demon King. Thankfully though, after Zelda stopped Link from being a power-hungry monster, he gave up the Triforce of Courage and reverted back to his old self. In another short story, we are provided with some lore in regards to the Triforce. It's stated that no one knows where the artifact came from, and by this era, Princess Zelda has the Triforce of Wisdom, Ganon has the Triforce of Power, and Link has the Triforce of Courage in his heart. We'll talk about this bit of lore later on in the video. In this really less eventful story, Link takes Zelda to the Eagle Dungeon for some training. However, Link is kidnapped by an evil Wizrobe who is against Ganon, and Zelda must use all of her strength to save Link, while getting some training in, of course. In this next story, the Triforce of Wisdom declares that Link must become the new King of Hyrule, and Impa passes this message to our hero before she falls asleep due to draining all of her magic power that kept the seal around the Northern Palace. Once Link becomes the new King of Hyrule, he leads Hyrule's army into battle against Ganon, who found the opportunity to attack the palace. Though a clumsy battle, Ganon's army, like always, was forced to retreat in the end, and after the events of this story, Harkinian was given back the title King of Hyrule. In this story, we learn that for one full day every decade, the Triforce vanishes and is unable to be possessed by anyone. And that one day is when this story takes place. Since the Triforce was gone, Lynels attacked Saria Town and set it on fire. Since Link was away on a journey, Zelda had to go help the villagers on her own. She is able to defeat all of the Lynels with her bow, but finds out that the son of the village's hero, Cassiopeia, was bitten by a rope, and will die if not given proper treatment. However, this day was the perfect time to defeat Ganon, now that he didn't have the Triforce of Power, so Zelda had to make a choice. Either save the boy and let Ganon continue to cause chaos in Hyrule, or defeat Ganon and let this one boy die in order to save the lives of many others. As the story continues, Zelda decides that it's best to save the boy at the cost of letting Ganon spread more chaos, because the day the lives of Hyrule's people are taken for granted is when Ganon will truly win. The final story of the Valiant Comics, that I read at least, takes place during the last story, but focuses on Link's journey on the day of the Triforce. He went to visit his parents in the kingdom of Caladia, but when he went to greet his parents, they kicked him out. As Link later finds out, his parents confused him with the new evil ruler of the kingdom, who looks exactly like Link. This was actually Dark Link, who locked up Queen Selene in the castle dungeon, and later locked Link up as well. In a desperate attempt to bring the kingdom back to normal, the usurper is challenged to a duel that will determine the kingdom's fate. Even though Link didn't have the Triforce of Courage with him, he was able to beat his evil self and bring peace back to this kingdom. So after covering a bunch of the stories packed within the Valiant Comics, I can pretty confidently say that these comics are not canon, and there are a ton of reasons why, but I'll go over some of the few that I have. For starters, these comics are set up to take place after the adventure of Link, when Zelda the First was woken up by Link. He used the entire Triforce to break the curse on the princess, and after this game, the sacred artifact is in the possession of the royal family. But is that how it is in the comics? Nope. Zelda has the Triforce of Wisdom, and Ganon somehow has the Triforce of Power again. And by the way, how was Ganon resurrected if Link wasn't killed? So, I think you are all seeing my point. While these comics are promoted to take place after the adventure of Link, referencing a ton of characters and locations from that game, these comics are more like an adaptation to the series rather than an addition to the timeline. So again, unfortunately, these comics are not canon. It's kind of a bummer that the Valiant comics aren't canon in my opinion, because I thought for sure that they would take place after the adventure of Link, at least from what I've heard about them before, but as we found out, they heavily contradict what is established from Zelda 1 and the Adventure of Link itself. The comics do use Adventure of Link's locations and stuff, as we said before, but yeah, it just doesn't align very well. And it's kind of a bummer because I'm kind of hoping that we could have added more spin-off games to the timeline without it contradicting anything, but I guess they're called spin-offs for a reason. However, we're not going to stop looking at spin-off games though, as it'll be a while before we cover our next one, but I think what I have scheduled is Link's crossbow training, probably covering that. I think that's the next spin-off game we're covering, but other than that, I finished playing Majora's Mask, so I'm going to work on the video for that, and right now I'm playing the Oracle games, which would be the next video after the Majora's Mask one. But anyway, thank you all so much for tuning in, and I'll see you on our next adventure.